One question the New York Islanders have to be asking before the season starts: with his role on the ice likely to diminish, should Anders Lee still wear the C? We'll talk about that and a lot more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Lots to talk about on today's show, but first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You can also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles, and you can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR, VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long during the offseason. That includes hirings, firings, trade rumors, free agency, and the draft. If it's happening to the New York Islanders, we'll have it for you right here on the Locked On Islanders podcast. And it's always great to talk a little Isles hockey with you, game time or anytime. So here we are in late July, and there's a question that's sort of been nagging at me throughout the offseason. And we saw this over the course of last year, but I think it's only looking more and more like this is something the team has to address as we move forward in time, and that is this. Anders Lee has been the New York Islanders captain now since the departure of John Tavares. That's a while. I mean, literally, Lee took over in 2018 as the Islanders captain. And, that means right now he has held that position for 6 seasons. And if he keeps it, this will be the 7th season that Lee has worn the C. But the issue is this, and I think it's something that we sort of need to figure out. And it goes all the way back in not just Islanders history, but really NHL history. And that is this. Can you still be an effective captain if you're not a major part of the team on the ice? And it's tough to lead when you're a fringe player. Not impossible. Not going to say it's never been done before, but realistically, usually your captain is somebody who is an integral part of your lineup, who's going to play major minutes, who, when the game is on the line, this is the guy you want on the ice to help your team win. Because if you're on the ice in big situations, you lead by example. You could be rah-rah all you want. You could be a vocal guy in the locker room, but it loses a certain amount of, believability, or a certain amount of respect is lost when you're not out there on the ice. And very often in the history of hockey, you see that when a player's role starts to diminish, they may not be the best fit as captain anymore. And look, Anders Lee, up until a year or so ago, was a top 6 forward for the New York Islanders. More often than not, he was on the first line maybe the second line if the first line wasn't, a good fit. But over the course of his recent years, we have seen that role get reduced. And look, Lee, for example, just wasn't playing as often last season as he was in the recent past. And the simplest metric here is ice time. Anders Lee's ice time this year was the lowest it had been since 2016-2017, which was quite literally 2016-2017 was the year, a couple of years before he took the C, when he was still some sort of a young player trying to establish his credentials in the NHL. So this year he was on ice for 15 minutes and 34 seconds per game. Not terrible, but certainly no longer top six. And remember, he started the season on the top six. Didn't finish it there, but spent, let's say, a third to half of the season getting top 6 minutes and kind of playing that role, seeing ice time on the power play, often on the second power play unit, even though he wasn't being all that productive on the power play. So again, you sort of look at the diminishing role for Anders Lee. Look, he played well in the playoffs. He had a goal and 3 assists in the 5 games. But, for example, in game 2, which is when he scored the goal, he was a -3. The goal came on the power play, and he played only 13 minutes and 1 second of ice time. And, again, you just need to see. If you're going to be the leader, you got to be out there on the ice more often than not. It is rare to see a captain be a fourth-line player. You could get away with a third-line player, I guess, but you want your captain to be one of the guys that your coaches trust when you're down a goal or up a goal and you want to get that big game-tying goal, or you want to avoid giving up that big game-tying goal. When the game or the season or the playoff berth is on the line, you want that player, that captain, to sort of be one of the guys. He doesn't have to be out there all the time, but he's got to be one of the guys the coach wants to put out there. Can Anders Lee do it? And I think you got to go all the way back to the very first captain in Islanders history, Ed Westfall. Great Islander, great captain, was the leader of a young team starting in that first season who, had won 2 Stanley Cups with the Bruins. The Islanders lacked a lot of players who had that experience. And for 5 years, Ed Westfall was the captain. But in 1977-78, after 5 years of being the captain, Ed Westfall voluntarily stepped down and gave the C to Clark Gillies, who later voluntarily stepped down and said, I don't feel like the captaincy is for me. Gave the C to Dennis Potvin. Again, to me, a guy like Anders Lee, and I'm a big Anders Lee fan, don't get me wrong, but when you've got a guy earning $7 million a year, but producing like he's earning $3.5 million a year, maybe $4 million offensively, and isn't seeing the ice time he used to see, maybe, just maybe, it's time to say, you know what? Give someone else the C. I could see keeping an A on Anders Lee's jersey or sweater, but I don't imagine that him having this C would make a lot of sense. And if you're moving on from Anders Lee as the captain, does it make sense? Who are the top candidates? Last year, the alternates, Cal Clutterbuck, he may not be back. Brock Nelson, J.G. Pajot, he may not be back, although, again, with Lou Lamoriello, I believe changes when I see them. And then at times, Scott Mayfield wore the A before he was injured. To me, the other player who you got to put into the equation, maybe two, Bo Horvat, I think, is a natural potential successor. And maybe you would also want to take a look at Matthew Barzal as a possible successor. But again, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors in the locker room. To me, it would make sense for Anders Lee to think about relinquishing the C and maybe going on to give it to another player. But again, a lot of time between now and the start of the season, and whether Anders Lee will do that, whether Anders Lee will be traded or bought out, doesn't look likely, but it would make sense on a number of levels. We'll see what happens with Lou Lamoriello, Anders Lee, and the captain C between now and the start of the season. We have got more to talk about on today's show. Who've been the best captains in Islanders history? We'll go back and take a look at that. Plus, interesting rumors being put out there by a reliable source about a possible team that could be interested in Oliver Wahlstrom via trade. And for our Islanders' birthday of the day, the player who shared the net with Billy Smith during the Islanders' first two seasons in the NHL. Let's see if you can guess who that is. We've got all that and more next on the Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, and that makes getting tickets faster and easier. In fact, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and you get their lowest price guarantee, so Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. My favorite feature on the Game Time app, you can go on the app and get a panoramic view of what you'll see from your seat before you buy the ticket, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day, bringing you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I wanted to look back at the history of the captaincy on Long Island. The Islanders have had some really great captains. We mentioned Ed Westfall, who was the first captain of the team, and that was a great move. And Westfall really was a leader in the locker room. The Islanders had so many young, inexperienced players. And Westfall had won Stanley Cups in 1970 and 1972 with the Boston Bruins. He was a veteran on a team full of guys with a lot of little or no NHL experience. And he gave the Islanders 5 great seasons of captaincy before, as I mentioned earlier, stepping aside and giving the C to a young, up-and-coming Clark Gillies, who later on, and I think this was big of the late, great Clark Gillies, who just said he wasn't comfortable being the captain, that he just felt it was distracting from his ability to play his best hockey. So he basically stepped down and gave the C to Dennis Potvin. I think it is clear that Potvin was the greatest captain in Islanders history. By that time, he was already a veteran, and he wore the C for all 4 Stanley Cup wins by the New York Islanders, all those consecutive series wins. He held on to the C until the 1986-87 season. And if you think about that, that also shows you that the last season he played on the team, Dennis Potvin was no longer wearing the C. Now, he still played 72 games that year. It wasn't like he wasn't on the ice, but Potvin kind of felt, again, his role was diminishing. He was getting on in years, and it was time to give the leadership to another player. And I think that just made sense at the time. Brent Sutter took over for about 4 years. Then Pat Flatley was a solid captain. He wore the C during the big 1993 playoff run to the conference final. Flatley having been with the team by that point for almost a decade, he held on to the C until he left after the 95-96 season. 96-97, the Islanders did not have a captain, with Scott LaChance and Ziggy Palffy wearing the A. And then you sort of had a bunch of players who held the C briefly with mixed results. Brian McCabe, Trevor Linden, both of them held it for 1 season. Kenny Janssen for 2. I think Janssen was, a really good captain on some really struggling teams at times. Although by then they were starting to get better and did make the playoffs again. Janssen also the first non-North American captain. Then you had Michael Pekka, Alexei Yashin, who I think was the best player on the team, but maybe not the ultimate leader. Then you had sort of veteran guys who were on the downside of their career, but again, very young, inexperienced rosters. Bill Guerin, Doug Waite, kind of filling that role. But again, Waite, for example, in that last season, just wasn't playing as often. And when he was out of the lineup, you had the alternate captains, Franz Nielsen, Kyle Oposo, and Mark Streit, kind of splitting time with the C. Then you went to Streit. He became the next captain for a couple of years before he departed. And then I think John Tavares had 5-year run as the Islanders captain before he departed for his favorite, for his favorite team, the Toronto Maple Leafs. And now he wears the C up in Toronto, although, believe it or not, there has been some rumors that maybe it's time for the Maple Leafs to move on from John Tavares as their captain. And again, Tavares, like Lee, not a vocal guy, not a rah-rah kind of captain, but that doesn't mean he wasn't a good captain. You don't need to be the loudest guy in the room to be a leader. You just need to be the guy who, when he speaks, everybody respects what he has to say. If you're speaking all the time, people can tune out your words, but you think of some of the great captains in NHL history. You talk about Dennis Potvin. You talk about maybe Mark Messier, guys who it's not that they spoke all the time, but boy, when they spoke, they were respected. And to me, that is sort of the biggest key to being the right guy to wear the C. So is Anders Lee still the Islanders' best choice to have the C on his sweater? That's not going to be an easy answer. I think it's something that Lou Lamoriello, Patrick Waugh, Anders Lee, and a few of the other leaders in the locker room are going to have to decide upon. But I wouldn't be surprised or shocked if the best move for the Islanders was to move on at this point from Anders Lee as their captain. We have got more to discuss on today's show. A rumor out there concerning a team that may be interested in Oliver Wahlstrom and trading for his rights. Let's talk about that, whether it is a good fit. And you'll be surprised maybe as to what the trade offers that was suggested might be. We'll talk about that. We'll have our Islanders birthday of the day. All that coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available for U.S. customers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So, everydayers, you know, we've talked on the show about Oliver Wahlstrom and where Wally kind of stands right now. That, you know, Lou Lamoriello basically said he gave him a qualifying offer because he thinks he doesn't want to lose Wally for nothing. That means that a trade is likely, and I think there was a certain amount of cooperation between Oliver Wahlstrom's agent and the Islanders organization as far as him making that arbitration request. It puts a deadline, and we know the deadline is 10 days away, August 1st, for his arbitration hearing, and hopefully that creates the impetus for a trade to happen sooner. Wahlstrom would get to start training camp on time with his new team, move to wherever he's moving, get to know the new city, get to know his teammates, get a square chance at making the roster with his new team, etc. And the Islanders would get whatever compensation they can get in exchange for Oliver Wahlstrom. Well, in the hockey news, the Tampa Bay Lightning's writer basically suggested that they should be interested in adding a player like Oliver Wahlstrom. And, you know, obviously Wally has a lot to prove, and I think a change of scenery would really help him. I think that would be ideal for both Wahlstrom and the Islanders. And we know the Lightning are a team that doesn't have a lot of cap room right now. But, you know, taking a flyer on Wahlstrom, let's say a one-year deal at about $1 million, give or take a little bit here or there, would certainly benefit both Wahlstrom, who would get to play with some talented offensive players where he would not be the primary focus of any other team facing the Lightning, and a team that has a history of being a little bit better offensively than the Islanders are. And it would get the Islanders some compensation in exchange for Wahlstrom. And, basically, the writer for the Hockey News, Michael DeRosa, said that a trade for Wahlstrom would likely need to start with the Lightning's 2026 third-round pick. You know what? At this stage, if the Islanders could get a third-round pick, even if it's a year later, for Oliver Wahlstrom's rights, I think they should do that in a heartbeat. Yeah, you don't know where the Lightning are going to be in the standings, not this year, but the following year. Obviously, a lot can happen between now and then. But a third-round pick for Wahlstrom, a player who has struggled on and off the ice with Islanders management, I think it would be a positive thing for the Lightning, for Wahlstrom, and certainly for the New York Islanders, something that the team definitely could and should consider if the Lightning are willing to make that move. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And today, essentially, Islander fans, is going to be the 80th birthday of former Islanders goalie Gerry Desjardins. Now, the Islanders claimed him in the expansion draft from the Chicago Blackhawks, and Desjardins played 44 games for the first-year Islanders. That was tops on the team. Only went 5-35-3, had an .866 save percentage, and a goals against average of 4.69. And before you write him off as a bad goalie, you got to remember how much that team struggled. Came back with the Islanders the following year and had a 3.12 goals against average and a .902 save percentage. And that team still wasn't all that good. The following year, he started off in the WHA with the Michigan Stags / Baltimore Blades, but then played in the Stanley Cup Final for the Buffalo Sabres, and finished his career in Buffalo after the 77-78 season. 5'11", 180 pounds, native of Sudbury, Ontario, a solid NHL goalie, was an assistant coach with the London Knights in the late 80s and early 90s. One of his better games as an Islander, well, how about January 23rd, 1973, Islanders hosting the old California Golden Seals at the Nassau Coliseum, and the goalies, Marv Edwards for California, Gerry Desjardins, obviously, for the Islanders. Islanders took an early 2-0 lead on goals by Bob Cook and Richard Grenier. Then Reggie Leach scored the only goal of the game for the Seals before the Islanders just went on cruise control and crushed the Seals by a score of 8-1. Craig Cameron, a hat trick, and a 4-point game with an assist. Ralph Stewart, a goal and 3 assists, a goal and 2 assists for Don Blackburn. But for Gerry Desjardins, a 30-save effort, a .968 save percentage, as the Islanders went on to beat the Seals 8-1. This was only the 6th win in Islanders history, and it improved their record to 6-38-4 in that very difficult first season in the NHL for the New York Islanders. So, Gerry Desjardins, the Islanders' starting goalie in year 1 of their NHL existence, he is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day, everydayers. Tomorrow on the show, we'll have the latest rumors, any news on Oliver Wahlstrom, and we will continue to, again, shortly take a look at each Islander draft pick from this year and give you a little bit more information and scouting on them. So make sure you stay with us throughout this off season. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.